A tax secret scandal involving one of the country's biggest accounting firms.
Effectively now, they're going to find it pretty hard to get any of those big, lucrative government contracts.
The fallout from revelations that senior partners at consulting firm PwC misused confidential Australian government information to help big multinational companies avoid paying more tax has dominated federal politics in recent weeks. There have been questions about how it happened, but also about how entrenched consultancies are in the mechanics of running the country and how much it is costing.
Do you have an aggregate figure across government for all PwC contracts?
As of 16 May 2023, for the financial year to date, we have committed to contracts worth $255.2 million with PwC.
This is not the only controversy in which PwC has become involved.
You must, as the lead on the project, have gone back to Catherine Campbell and said, "You've paid for the report, we've done the work, why don't you want it?"
No, we didn't.
The firm was paid $1 million in 2017 to review the discredited robo-debt scheme, but it did not raise concerns about the legality of the scheme. It also strangely never delivered a final report, despite being paid for it.
The Royal Commission has heard evidence that the report, had it been given through the official channels, would at least have given the Department of Human Services a reason to think twice about ignoring some of the more important aspects of that report.
But PwC is certainly not the only consulting firm to find itself in the middle of political controversy.
Our new official target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050.
The Morrison government paid $6 million to the consultancy firm McKinsey & Company for modelling work on its net zero climate by 2050 policy. The plan was heavily criticised for falling short of net zero by 2050.
I've seen more detailed fortune cookies than the document released by the government today.
Boston Consulting Group also pocketed almost half of a $92 million spend by the Department of Home Affairs investigating plans to privatise major aspects of immigration visa processing.
It's time for Peter Dutton to join with Labor in ruling out visa privatisation.
The plan was ultimately dumped. In 2020, the same firm found itself at the centre of a particularly high-profile controversy.
She's been instructed to stand aside, and if she doesn't wish to do that, Mr Speaker, she can go.
In 2020, the then Prime Minister's treatment of Australia Post Chief Executive Christine Holgate became a major political issue. Underlying that controversy was a brawl about a secret proposal to partially privatise Australia Post, a recommendation Ms Holgate said came from a Boston Consulting report.
The majority of the findings I did not agree with, and I believe that if those findings had ever been rolled out, thousands and thousands of jobs would have gone, services would have been cut.
The value of the $1.3 million Boston report subsequently came under scrutiny.
We had evidence from the Australia Post Board last week that your report told them, and many of them have sat on the board for a long time, nothing new.
We did a range of analysis as part of our report, some of which we believe had not been done previously by either Australia Post nor the shareholder departments.
The issue of outsiders doing the work of government goes much, much further than the seemingly ubiquitous reports of consultancy companies on particular policy proposals. Labor pledged to cut back the use of private sector consultants and contractors if it won office last year. It long claimed that not only was the Coalition's fondness for contracting out an ideological one, it was a way of hiding the actual size of the public service to boost the Coalition's small government credentials, but at a much bigger cost.
When Tony Abbott got elected, their great policy, their only policy for the public service, was to cut the number of public servants by 15,000. Why? Well, that was the number it was when John Howard left office. I mean, it was that ridiculous. There was no art to it, there was no science to it.
We don't need 10,000 more public servants in Canberra on top of the already 181,000 public servants. It's taken the government less than 12 months.
One of the first steps the new government took was to order an audit from the Department of Finance and the Public Service Commission. The audit brought together information on the use of external labour by 112 departments and organisations across the public service. It found that in 2021-22, these entities employed an external labour workforce of 53,900 full-time equivalent public service staff at a staggering cost of $20.8 billion. By way of comparison, the direct employment of the public servants in these 112 agencies in the same time period was 144,300. In other words, the government workforce was around 37% larger than it appeared. Labor MP Julian Hill has had a long-running interest in the issue of governments contracting out advice and service delivery.
Have you ever heard of the term the dairy? Sorry, the dairy.
No.
It was a term that I was told by a couple of people that has been unkindly used for the Commonwealth because you milk it for all it's worth with contract variations.
Hill says coalition staff caps on the public service led to basic functions that should be done in-house being outsourced.
They talked about them in terms of efficiency. This was false. It was fake. This was not about saving money. It was an ideology of privatisation. Thousands of labour hire workers doing the same job side by side with public servants.
The most conspicuous number of outsiders are in defence. The Finance and Public Service Audit found that slightly under 35,000 of those 53,900 private sector workers were in the defence portfolio, mostly as what are known as outsourced service providers. The audit says those providers deliver services such as garrison, health and base support in the Defence Department, and cleaning, security services and facilities management across many other departments. This has been reasonably long-standing practice. But in the last decade, particularly with the coalition putting public service staff caps in place, there has been an increasing tendency to get around the caps and employ staff as contractors, including within the Defence Force establishment at Russell in Canberra, in areas like IT. And more significantly, there has been a move across the public service to get consultants and contractors to do actual policy development instead of just service delivery that has caused particular disquiet. A central question is whether you get frank and fearless advice from a contractor and whether in fact that's one reason why you ask them for it rather than the public service.
At the end of the day, it's a government is paying a consulting firm for advice. And you can shape that advice. You can say, I don't want those bits, I do want these bits. Can you rewrite that bit?
You've got all of these conflicts that then interact in a really potent way to create an agency that doesn't know what it's doing, that loses the people that do know what they're doing, and then brings in outside influence to try and plug the gap and then creating the perfect circle all over again.
Hill argues that the habit of contracting out and the coalition's preference for private sector advice has reduced the public sector's capacity and its confidence in itself to provide advice. He says the public service has fallen in with a logo fetish, which only values work with the name of a Big Four firm on the cover.
Too much credence is given in the media, in public debates, to something that's done by one of the Big Four firms.
As with any culture, the question is how you change it. And the challenge for Labor now will be how to rebuild capacity and confidence in the public service.
I spoke to Green Senator Barbara Pocock earlier about the PwC scandal. Barbara Pocock, welcome to 7:30.
Good to be with you, Sarah.
Now, you questioned Treasury today about the fact that they knew in 2018 that the ATO was looking at PwC's activities. How did they justify not taking action back then?
I have the impression today, after the evidence from Treasury, from the Tax Practitioners Board, from the ATO, that we have a series of silos and we need to break those silos open. And as long as they're siloed, then our regulatory machinery around big consultants, around disasters like we have seen unfolding in PwC, means they can just, wind their way through those silos, straight to the bank, essentially. They can make money out of a regulatory system which is failing. And I believe there's responsibility across a range of departments on this issue, and certainly a need for better regulation and a change in current arrangements.
So back in 2018, did Treasury know enough, or did they have enough of an indication that something serious was afoot? Enough knowledge that would justify doing something then?
I believe so. I believe there was certainly antennas were up People knew, certainly in tax, that certain schemes were afoot, that they were wrong. There were conversations underway, but no effective action was taken really until, nearly 5 years later. So it's a very long wait for the diligent Australian taxpayer and community member to see real action on something that was really seriously corrupt.
Now, I think that is the question that's so puzzling for the rest of us, especially the rest of us taxpayers who face serious penalties if we delay or make errors past a certain point. Why has it taken so long for this scandal to surface?
Well, some people are suggesting to me in my email, and I'm getting an enormous amount of feedback from the Australian community on this issue, is that there's kind of a go slow underway over the 8 years since the initial misdemeanour was committed. And, in some cases, the possibility, some people suggest, of a kind of protection racket. These are very big consulting companies. PwC is huge, and it's all about relationships for them. They have relationships with very senior people in government, in the senior leadership of places like Treasury, the Australian Tax Office. So it's very cosy, and what we need is a regulatory regime that really deals with those relationships and pushes transparency and proper governance onto these very big companies. And there's a question really about, are they too big? They're big conglomerates that do a whole lot of different things and lots of conflicts of interest potentially inside them.
Now, PwC in its open letter on this scandal recently said that they're now going to ring-fence their government work. What does that mean, and should we trust them?
Well, great question. I mean, what is a ring fence? Ring fences are designed, we are told, to separate certain activities from others within an organisation. Now, anyone who's ever been in a workplace knows, you share the car park, you have a coffee together, you socialise after work. Ring fencing is not a sustainable proposition when these organisations are, on the one hand, for example, advising on the regulations, say, of aged care, and at the same time advising people on how to manage their way around aged care. So, they're both assisting clients and setting the rules, and it's not a plausible proposition.
At the same time, isn't there a danger here also of overcorrection, where experts with knowledge of a complex area are discouraged from sharing their expertise with government?
I think it's really important that government gets advice from people who know their way around, but you only have to spend a few minutes reading the email exchanges between people within PwC to know this was not an effort by senior and experienced people in PwC to genuinely assist the Australian government to collect tax. It was a predatory operation that was about trying to make money as fast as possible, and it is really disturbing to read that attitude and to know that people in Treasury and in the Australian Tax Office were spoken of with complete disrespect. It's very disturbing, and I think we need to get support from people who know their way around, the experts, but we also need to know they're acting in good faith. And in this particular example, in PwC, that was certainly not the case.
So when you read those emails and understand that attitude, how much do you believe there has been an accounting for it, sorry, forgive the pun, but an accounting for it internally about what went wrong, and therefore the sincerity of what PwC is now saying?
Well, today, the Senate committee that I'm part of considered correspondence from PwC, which are still failing today to put into the public realm the names of people who have acted inappropriately with the context of what they actually did, when and where and how. And that is a very disturbing thing. They gave us the list of names as a Senate committee, but they have failed to take responsibility to go into the public sphere and put those names on the record and explain. Some of them, perhaps, have only received an email. They've acted with complete innocence. Others have serious responsibilities either by misusing confidential information to make money or participating in a cover-up or poor management and bad culture. So, PwC, even today, weeks into this crisis, is not taking responsibility and instead, asking the Senate to table those names or to deal with this matter. That is really inappropriate. And I think they've been very poorly advised and acted badly.
And just in relation to those names, is it the right thing to release all the names when, as you say, some of those people may just have been the recipient of a single email?
Well, I've been asking PwC, along with my fellow committee members, Senator O'Neill, that those names should be in the public realm. But we also need to know what they did. It is not appropriate just to throw out a bunch of names and not know exactly who did what. The only people we really know who did something that was clearly reprehensible are the 4 people who have left PwC. We don't even know the names of the 9 partners in total who probably have acted, in a way that's really inappropriate. And I think the Australian public need to know, and most importantly, as we heard in evidence today in our committee, many parts of government need to know who did what amongst this group of 63, because they are dealing with people in PwC. And, for example, one of the named people has been training senior taxation department officials. It is very inappropriate. And without knowing the names, how do they actually sort out, effective action and, have integrity within their organisations?
And just briefly, should this matter be referred to the National Anti-Corruption Commission?
In my view, it's just a late our misère. That is what should happen. It should be top of the list for the National Anti-Corruption Commission. We need to really sort this out, and we need to fix it for the long term with the right regulation and the right management of our consulting industry.
Barbara Pocock, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.